He expected me to pay his wife's mortgage, then they took me to court for $900,000. I never saw it coming. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had known Mark Reynolds for over a decade. We met in college, started a small consulting business together, and became more like family than friends. He had always seemed dependable, someone you could count on no matter what. So when he called me one night in a panic, saying he needed help with a sudden financial problem, I didn't hesitate. I trusted him, as I always had. Mark explained that his wife, Jessica, had fallen behind on their mortgage, and he was struggling to cover it. He sounded desperate, vulnerable, and I felt a responsibility to step in. I transferred some money and even offered to co-sign on a small loan to help him out. In my mind, it was temporary, a way to help a friend in need. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark thanked me repeatedly and assured me that I wouldn't have to worry about anything long-term. But then small things started bothering me. Statements arrived in my mail that I hadn't expected. Bills for properties I didn't know about. Notes about payments that had been made, but I had never authorized them. I asked Mark about it casually at first. He brushed me off, saying it was just paperwork and that I shouldn't worry. I tried to trust him. After all, I had known him for years. But a nagging feeling grew inside me. Something wasn't right. I began going through old emails and documents, and that's when the unease turned into shock. There were loans and payments being made in my name, with my signature forged or assumed. Mark had been using my trust to secure his wife's mortgage, without ever telling me the full story. It wasn't just a simple favor anymore, it was manipulation. The realization hit me hard. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and betrayal. How could someone I trusted so completely turn my help into a trap? I confronted Mark, hoping there was some misunderstanding, but he remained calm, almost smug. He said it was business and that I should have been more careful. That moment changed everything. The friend I had relied on, the partner I had trusted, had crossed a line I never thought he would. I was angry, but more than that, I felt a deep sense of sadness. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just let Mark manipulate me and take advantage of my trust. It was time to figure out exactly what had been done, how deep the deception went, and how I could take back control of my life. I realized that if I didn't act, I would lose far more than money. I would lose my dignity, my sense of security, and the truth about someone I had once called a friend. From that moment, I started paying attention to every detail, saving every piece of evidence, and preparing myself for what I knew would be a battle, not just for my finances, but for justice. Mark came to me a few weeks after I first helped him, looking more serious than usual. He told me about a new property he and Jessica were buying, saying it was just for her security and that he didn't want to risk it alone. He asked me to co-sign a loan for it. I hesitated immediately. Co-signing meant I was taking responsibility if anything went wrong. I thought about it for days, weighed the risks, but in the end, I agreed. I trusted Mark and thought I was helping a friend protect his family. That's when Jessica came into the picture more directly. I met her briefly during a dinner Mark arranged to thank me. Jessica was polite, but there was something off, an icy, calculating calm that didn't match the warmth Mark had always shown. I sensed she was watching me closely, like she was measuring how much influence I had in their lives. Something about her felt strategic, and I couldn't shake the unease. Once the loan paperwork came through, I started reviewing the documents carefully. That's when the first inconsistencies appeared. Numbers didn't add up. Certain fees were missing explanations, and some signatures looked unusual. I mentioned it to Mark, trying to keep my tone casual, hoping I was just misunderstanding. He brushed it off, saying it was standard processing and that I was overthinking it. His calmness made me doubt myself, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. As weeks went by, I noticed more subtle signs that something was wrong. Payments were being made on dates I didn't authorize. Statements showed amounts I hadn't agreed to. Each time I questioned Mark, he had a reason or excuse, always smooth, always convincing. At first, I wanted to believe him, but the feeling of unease kept growing. Then came the moment I realized I was trapped. This wasn't a small favor anymore. I was financially responsible for a property I didn't want and didn't understand fully. Every interaction with Mark and Jessica added pressure. Their words were carefully chosen to make me doubt myself, and their smiles had intentions I couldn't yet prove. The more I questioned, the more tense the atmosphere became, and I felt a weight I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my trust had been exploited and that I was being manipulated. I was involved in something I had never agreed to, and backing out suddenly could mean legal trouble or damage to my reputation. Every time I looked at the paperwork, my heart sank. I felt caught between doing the right thing for myself and the fear of angering people I once considered friends. By the end of that month, I understood one thing clearly: I couldn't blindly trust Mark anymore. What started as helping a friend had turned into a trap, and I had to figure out how deep it went before it completely consumed me. I needed to pay attention to every detail, because it was obvious now that this was only the beginning of a much larger problem. I decided to go through the paperwork one more time, hoping I was imagining things, but what I found made my stomach drop. Hidden among the loan documents and statements were records of assets Mark and Jessica had been keeping secret. Accounts I had never been told about, properties I didn't know existed, and transactions that didn't make any sense. It was clear they had been covering things up from the very beginning, using me as a pawn in their plan. I felt a rush of shock, anger, and deep sadness all at once. I had trusted them completely, and now it felt like every step I had taken to help them had been a mistake. I went over every detail again and again, trying to understand how I hadn't noticed it before. But the more I looked, the more I realized how intentional it had been. I felt used, heartbroken, and foolish for believing in their friendship. When I finally confronted Mark privately, hoping for at least some honesty, he didn't react the way I expected. Instead of shame or remorse, he laughed. He told me I had misunderstood the situation and implied that I should feel guilty for questioning him. It was infuriating. His calm, mocking tone made me feel like my concerns didn't matter, like I was being punished for trying to protect myself. I left that conversation feeling smaller, trapped by my own trust and his manipulation. Meanwhile, people around me started noticing the tension. Friends asked if everything was okay, neighbors gave me sympathetic looks, and I could feel the stress pressing down on me in every part of my life. Even though I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The situation was consuming my thoughts and making it hard to focus on anything else. I felt trapped, not just financially, but emotionally. I started thinking seriously about walking away. I considered cutting ties with Mark and Jessica completely and trying to let the situation go. But every time I imagined that, a knot formed in my stomach. If I walked away, I would likely be responsible for debts I hadn't agreed to. The financial consequences were terrifying. I realized that simply leaving wasn't an option. I couldn't let them manipulate me and get away with it without some kind of response. And that's when a thought started forming, quiet at first, but growing stronger every day: I needed to take control. I needed to protect myself, my finances, and my dignity. The anger and betrayal I felt were raw, but they also fueled something else, a determination not to be victimized. I started making mental plans, thinking about how I could turn the tables. The first seeds of revenge took root that day, and I knew that if I wanted justice, I couldn't just wait and hope things would fix themselves. I had to act. One morning, I opened my mailbox and froze. There it was, a thick envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it and read the words I never thought I would see: Mark and Jessica were suing me for $900,000. I read the letter over and over, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. But it was real. They were taking me to court, trying to make me pay for something I had never agreed to. I felt completely betrayed. It wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal of a friendship I had cherished for years, the trust one had placed in Mark, and the morality I believed we shared. The idea that someone I had helped could turn around and accuse me like this made my chest tighten. I spent that night pacing my apartment, unable to sleep. Tears came unbidden as I replayed every conversation, every decision, and every moment I had trusted them. I felt small, trapped, and terrified. After days of barely eating or sleeping, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed help. I reached out to a lawyer I had heard about through a friend, Laura Simmons. The moment I explained the situation, Laura's expression shifted. She had seen manipulation like this before. She looked at the documents, listened to my story, and immediately started pointing out where Mark and Jessica had tried to cover their tracks and twist the facts. She told me this wasn't just a financial dispute, it was a calculated attempt to use my trust against me. Laura's confidence gave me the first flicker of hope I had felt in weeks. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance to fight back, not just for my money, but for my dignity. I realized this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight to reclaim control of my life from people who had tried to destroy it. I also started gathering allies who could help me see the bigger picture. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had always been observant and cautious. He offered to help me track financial irregularities he had noticed over the past months. My accountant, Dana, started going through every statement, every transaction, and every loan document, looking for the evidence I needed to prove the truth. Together, they became a quiet but powerful support system, helping me feel less alone and more prepared for the battle ahead. Though fear still lingered, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Mark and Jessica bully me into submission. I wouldn't run, and I wouldn't apologize for trusting the wrong person. I would stand firm, gather every piece of proof I could find, and show the court the real story. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose. The path ahead would be hard, but I knew one thing clearly: I would fight, not just to survive, but to reclaim everything they had tried to steal from me. Once I decided to fight, Laura and I got to work immediately. We started digging into Mark and Jessica's finances, looking for anything that could prove they were lying and hiding things from me. Every document, every statement, every receipt became important. I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle that had been carefully hidden from me for months. As we went deeper, we discovered things that made my anger grow. Mark and Jessica had been siphoning money from other sources, profits from businesses I had no knowledge of, transfers between accounts that didn't make sense, and payments that had nothing to do with the loans they claimed I owed. It was clear now that they had planned this, using me as a scapegoat while they hid their wealth. I started documenting everything meticulously. Every bank statement, every email, every note was saved and organized. Laura helped me make sense of it all, showing me how each piece of evidence could be used to expose their lies in court. At first, I was scared. I had never dealt with something like this before, and the thought of standing up to them in a courtroom made my heart race. But with each new discovery, my fear was replaced by anger and a growing sense of justice. I found hidden accounts in Jessica's name, transactions that were clearly forged, and loans that had been manipulated to make it seem like I was responsible. Each discovery felt like a small victory, proof that their story was falling apart and that the truth could come out. I realized that their plan relied on me being afraid and silent, but now I had the power to fight back. I also started imagining how the courtroom battle would go. I pictured myself calmly presenting the evidence, showing how Mark and Jessica had lied and manipulated everything. I thought about how it would feel to finally have my voice heard, to prove that I hadn't been careless or naive, but betrayed. That vision kept me focused and determined, even on the days when the work felt overwhelming. Even outside the documents, I began noticing patterns in their behavior. They tried to act normal in public, but small slips showed their stress. Laura advised me to keep notes on every interaction, every conversation, and every email. Everything could help paint the full picture of how they had tried to deceive me. By the end of the month, I felt ready. I had collected enough evidence to challenge them, enough to fight not just for my money but for my dignity. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, but it was now paired with purpose. I knew the battle ahead would be hard, but I also knew I had the truth on my side. Mark and Jessica couldn't hide forever, and I was finally ready to make sure the court saw exactly who they were and what they had done. The day of the pre-trial meeting arrived, and I felt my stomach twist with nerves. I walked into the conference room, documents in hand, ready to face Mark and Jessica for the first time since discovering the full extent of their lies. Mark was already there, sitting with his usual confident posture, a faint smile on his face. Jessica stood beside him, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp, watching every movement I made. Mark started the meeting with charm, using that familiar, almost disarming tone. He apologized for the misunderstanding and suggested that it would be easier for everyone if I agreed to settle. He framed it like he was doing me a favor, as if accepting blame quietly would save me trouble. I could feel the pressure in the room, but I reminded myself why I was there. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. As they spoke, I stayed calm on the outside, but inside my mind was racing. I had my notes, my evidence, and my plan. Every word Mark said, every gesture he made, I quietly recorded in my memory and on paper. I wanted everything they admitted to be documented, even if it was subtle. Their confidence would be their undoing. Jessica joined in, her voice cold and calculated. She mocked my trust, sneering at the idea that I could have been so blind, so easily manipulated. She tried to twist the situation, making me feel guilty for doubting them and suggesting I was overreacting. It was a tactic to gaslight me, to make me question my own judgment. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't let it show. I kept my composure, knowing that any emotional reaction could be used against me later. While they tried to dominate the conversation, I began noticing cracks in their performance. Mark's charm occasionally faltered when I asked specific questions about accounts and transactions. Jessica's sneers and sarcasm sometimes betrayed a hint of panic. I noted it all silently, understanding that these small moments could become key pieces of evidence in court. Despite the fear that lingered in the pit of my stomach, I also felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since this all began, I realized I was no longer the passive victim. I was standing my ground, observing their manipulation, and preparing to turn it against them. That knowledge gave me strength, and a quiet confidence settled over me. By the end of the meeting, I walked out feeling more focused than ever. I knew exactly what I was up against, and I also knew that their attempts to intimidate me had failed. The meeting had been a test of nerves, and I had passed. I had remained calm, collected, and strategic. I realized that this confrontation was a turning point. From this moment on, I wasn't just defending myself, I was preparing to fight back, to expose every lie, and to take back what was rightfully mine. The day the trial began, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. Walking into the courtroom, I could feel the tension in the air. Mark and Jessica sat across from me, their confident expressions hiding the anxiety I knew they must feel. The judge called the session to order, and the process began. I watched as Laura laid out our case carefully. When it was my turn, I presented the evidence we had gathered over weeks of investigation. I showed hidden bank accounts, falsified loan documents, and records of payments they had tried to cover up. Every document, every number, every detail told the story of how I had been manipulated and deceived. I could feel my heart pounding, but I spoke calmly and clearly, determined to let the truth be heard. Mark and Jessica tried to defend themselves under oath. They lied, twisted facts, and attempted to make it seem like I had acted irresponsibly. But Laura was ready. Every inconsistency they made was pointed out, every false claim countered with clear proof. The more they spoke, the more their story fell apart. It was like watching a carefully built wall crumble brick by brick, and with each crack, I felt a surge of vindication. The courtroom watched closely. I could feel the tension, the whispers, the disbelief. I was exhausted from the emotional weight of the past months, but standing there, presenting the truth, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. Every piece of evidence was not just about the money, they were about exposing betrayal, manipulation, and abuse of trust. Laura helped me frame my defense not just as a legal argument but as a moral one. She emphasized how deeply I had been wronged, how I had been used because of my trust and willingness to help. She highlighted the ethical violations and emotional harm I had suffered. By the time we finished, it was clear that our story was not just about contracts and numbers, it was about integrity and justice. The judge listened attentively, asking questions that made Mark and Jessica stumble. Their lies were no longer hidden, and every attempt to sway the court in their favor failed. I could sense the judge's sympathy, not just for the evidence I presented, but for the way I had been treated. Even members of the audience, friends, and strangers in the courtroom, watched with a quiet awareness of the injustice I had endured. By the end of the day, I was mentally and emotionally drained. But there was also relief, a feeling that justice was beginning to tilt in my favor. I felt vindicated, knowing that my persistence, careful documentation, and courage had exposed the truth. The battle was far from over, but I finally knew I was not powerless. I had turned fear and betrayal into a path toward justice, and the court was beginning to recognize the wrongs I had endured. After seeing how the court reacted to the evidence, Laura suggested we take the next step. We decided to countersue Mark and Jessica for emotional distress and fraud. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about holding them accountable for the pain and manipulation they had caused me. I knew this was my chance to turn the tables and regain control over my life. We gathered more evidence, this time focusing on the stark contrast between their lives and mine. While I had struggled to keep up with unexpected debts and constant stress, Mark and Jessica had been living lavishly. Expensive trips, luxury cars, and hidden investments all came to light. Every piece of evidence highlighted their deceit, showing the court exactly how they had taken advantage of me while pretending to be victims themselves. The day we presented this part of the case, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, of course, fear that they would find some way to twist the story. But there was also a growing sense of power. I was no longer the person being manipulated. Every fact, every document, every proof I presented reminded me that I had control now. I was no longer a victim. Jessica tried to manipulate the jury, using her charm and emotional appeals, hoping to make them feel sorry for her. She painted herself as the one under pressure, the one being wronged, but the facts were undeniable. I stayed composed, letting the evidence speak louder than words. Every time she tried to sway the court with emotion, the truth of our documentation and proof cut through her story. I also realized that this wasn't about revenge through destruction. I didn't want to humiliate them or make them suffer out of spite. My goal was simpler and stronger. I wanted to reclaim my life, show the truth, and make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else in the same way. I made a personal plan for after the trial, focusing on rebuilding my life, protecting myself financially, and moving forward with dignity. The courtroom felt electric that day. The tension was almost unbearable as the jury reviewed the evidence, the lawyers made their arguments, and Mark and Jessica tried to salvage their credibility. Every small slip they made strengthened my position, and with each point we made, I felt my confidence grow. I could see the shift in the room, the truth was breaking through their carefully constructed lies. By the end of the session, I felt a quiet satisfaction settling over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I truly felt that the power was in my hands. I had turned their manipulation back on them, exposing the fraud, the lies, and the betrayal. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was no longer fighting to survive, I was fighting to win, to take back what was mine, and to finally walk away with my dignity intact. The day the judge delivered the verdict, I felt my heart pounding like never before. The courtroom was silent as the judge carefully read the decision. When the words finally came, it was like a weight lifted from my shoulders. The lawsuit against me was dismissed, and my counterclaims for fraud and emotional distress were fully recognized. I couldn't believe it at first. After months of fear, stress, and uncertainty, justice had finally been served. I learned that I would recover the financial losses I had unfairly been forced to cover. On top of that, I was awarded compensation for the emotional trauma I had endured. Tears streamed down my face as the reality sank in. I felt relief, validation, and freedom all at once. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the constant pressure of deceit hanging over me. The betrayal that had haunted me was now exposed, and I was no longer powerless. Mark and Jessica sat in stunned silence, their confidence shattered. They had attempted to manipulate the court, the jury, and me, but their lies had been completely exposed. The consequences were clear: legal penalties and public shame awaited them. I watched quietly as their plans unraveled. The people who had once intimidated me were now facing the reality of their actions, and I realized that justice was not only a legal victory but a moral one as well. After the trial, my life slowly began to stabilize. I focused on rebuilding my finances, reorganizing my personal affairs, and reclaiming the independence that had been threatened. Each day, I felt a little stronger, more confident, and more in control of my own life. I could finally trust my judgment again, knowing that I had stood firm against manipulation and deceit. Emotionally, the experience had been exhausting, but it had also transformed me. I cried openly, not from fear or sadness, but from relief, from the release of months of tension, and from the realization that I had survived something I never imagined possible. The journey had been painful, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The best part was knowing that the truth was fully exposed. There was no question of my innocence, no lingering doubt about what had happened. Mark and Jessica's betrayal was laid bare for everyone involved to see, and I had been the one to ensure it. I had turned their manipulation against them without losing myself in anger or revenge. Looking back, I realized that this victory was about more than money or legal triumph. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my trust in myself. For anyone who has ever been used, deceived, or betrayed, I want them to know that it is possible to fight back and win. Standing firm, gathering the truth, and keeping your integrity intact can lead to justice in ways that feel almost unimaginable. Sitting in my apartment a few weeks after the trial, I finally had a moment to breathe. The whirlwind of betrayal, manipulation, and court battles was over, and I could look back at everything that had happened. It felt surreal, how quickly trust can be broken and how easily someone can take advantage if you aren't careful. But it also felt empowering to see how far I had come, from feeling trapped and hopeless to standing strong and reclaiming my life. I thought a lot about the journey. I remembered the sleepless nights, the fear, the constant worry about being financially ruined. I remembered confronting Mark and Jessica, gathering evidence, and enduring their lies. And I remembered the moment the judge ruled in my favor, the relief, the tears, and the quiet sense that I had finally been heard. It made me realize that staying true to yourself, even when others are deceitful and greedy, can lead to real justice. During this time, I reconnected with friends who had supported me quietly but steadily through the ordeal. Their encouragement reminded me that I wasn't alone and that it was okay to lean on people you trust. I started to rebuild my life slowly, focusing on my own goals and independence rather than letting fear or anger guide me. I organized my finances, secured my accounts, and planned for a future where I wouldn't have to rely on anyone who might betray me. More than the money or the legal victory, I realized I had won something much deeper: my dignity, my peace, and my confidence. I could trust myself again, knowing I had navigated a situation that would have broken many people. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. The truth had been revealed, and I had stood firm through it all. That was enough. I also thought about the lessons learned. Life sometimes puts people in front of you who will try to manipulate, deceive, or use your kindness against you. But being vigilant, keeping integrity, and standing up for yourself can turn even the darkest experiences into strength. I had seen firsthand that patience, careful planning, and courage can lead to justice, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Now, as I look forward, I feel a sense of freedom I haven't felt in years. I can enjoy my life without fear, without being weighed down by betrayal or financial worry. I can trust my instincts and rely on the people who truly care. The experience has left me stronger, wiser, and more empowered than I ever imagined. In the end, this journey wasn't just about fighting a legal battle, it was about reclaiming my life, my confidence, and my peace of mind. I hope my story inspires anyone who has been betrayed to hold on to themselves, fight for what is right, and know that they, too, can emerge stronger and victorious.